The refusal notice arrived stamped in 6 colors and 3 threat levels, its language so carefully polite it bordered on panic. Coverage denied. Risk profile unacceptable. Clause after clause cited anomalies, unexplained losses, and a statistically significant correlation between survival events and human maintenance crews. They never said the word chaos. They didn't have to. I read it while drifting in Bay 12, watching my crew crawl across the hull like ants on a cathedral. Sparks fell in slow arcs. Laughter carried over the comms, casual, warm, utterly inappropriate in vacuum. The ship's heart was open to space, and they were arguing about sandwiches. This was not the first refusal. It was the 12th. Galactic insurers pride themselves on modeling everything. Micrometeorite impacts, reactor decay curves, crew fatigue across millennia. They insure suns while they are still clouds. They price probability until it weeps. But humans broke their math. Not by failing more often. By failing wrong. I am the ship's registrar, which means I sign things that outlive me and translate disaster into forms. I have learned their language well. When an insurer says unpredictable intervention, they mean a human saw something no sensor flagged and hit it with a wrench until physics reconsidered. When they say non-standard repair, they mean a human rewired a life support loop through the galley coffee heater because it was warmer there. When they say unapproved survival outcome, they mean everyone lived. The first incident was recorded a century ago on a cargo hauler that should have split in half near the Perseus Shear. Structural failure. Crew loss projected at 99.8%. The human engineer on watch disagreed with the projection, wedged herself between bulkheads, and sang while tightening bolts until their resonance stopped tearing the frame apart. The ship limped home. The insurer paid. They would never forget it. After that came the pattern. Human crews did not prevent accidents. They offended them. Fires went out after being insulted. Coolant loops behaved once threatened with worse plumbing. Hull breaches sealed themselves around gloved hands holding patches in place longer than any material tolerance allowed. Ships returned bearing scars that told stories actuaries could not parse. I watched my crew now. Jalen had his helmet off, hair floating, face inches from a live conduit. He was explaining to the conduit why it was wrong. The conduit flickered, then stabilized. I made a note for the log and erased it. Some things do not survive documentation. The insurers compiled data anyway. They charted losses, and the charts confused them. Human-maintained ships had higher incident rates and lower fatality rates. They arrived missing pieces, but carrying crews intact. Claims came with footnotes like crew improvised and situation escalated favorably. Favorably is not a number. Their models began to break. Premium spiked. Exclusions multiplied. Finally, the refusals came. No coverage for vessels employing human maintenance beyond advisory roles. No liability assumed for actions taken on instinct. One underwriter added a handwritten note that leaked into the record. We cannot insure miracles. I folded the notice and tucked it into my sleeve. Outside, something clanged, then stopped clanging. Cheers followed. The crew had fixed a vibration by removing a panel they all agreed had been looking at them funny. The ship's hum deepened. Content. We would sail uninsured again. That was becoming common. Human ships formed their own cooperatives, pooled risk, trusted each other. The Galaxy called it reckless. The Galaxy also began hiring us quietly when things went wrong beyond policy limits. I sent a brief reply to the insurers. Thank you for your consideration. We understand. Safe travels. I did not add what I wanted to say. You are not afraid of loss. You are afraid of surviving the wrong way. Bay 12 sealed. The crew drifted back inside, still arguing about sandwiches. The ship leaned into the dark and accelerated. Somewhere ahead, a failure was already forming, sharpening itself on probability. We would meet it without coverage, with tools that didn't belong together, and with humans who refused to let a story end where the math said it should. The insurers would hear about it later. They always did. The auditors arrived before the accident did, which should have been warning enough. 3 of them, faceless behind probabilistic veils, materialized in our briefing room with clipboards that adjusted themselves mid-sentence. They smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear. They asked for access to our maintenance logs.
I gave them what survived.
They frowned at gaps where events should have been. Missing timestamps. Repairs logged before failures officially occurred. A reactor coolant reroute labeled temporary that had been in place for 14 years. One auditor asked me, very carefully, if our crew understood standard operating procedure. I answered honestly. We understood it well enough to know when it would get us killed. They requested a demonstration. Jalen volunteered immediately, grinning like someone offered dessert instead of danger. He led them into the engine crawlspace, where heat shimmered and the ship's pulse pressed against the ribs. The auditor's sensors screamed quietly. Jalen tapped a pipe, listened, frowned, then kicked it. The vibrations smoothed out. The auditors stared at their instruments as error messages bloomed like algae. Why did that work? One asked. Jalen shrugged. It wanted to. They recorded that. Then deleted it. Then re-recorded it with qualifiers. Their veils flickered, probabilities recalculating in visible distress. I almost felt sorry for them. The accident came 6 hours later, right on schedule. A microfracture in the forward manifold, seeded years ago by a manufacturing shortcut from a defunct yard. The fracture propagated faster than any model predicted because the model assumed the manifold would behave.
It didn't.
It screamed, tore, and vented plasma into spaces that had never known fire. Alarms blossomed. Bulkheads slammed. The auditors froze, paralyzed by cascading alerts that refused to resolve. The ship lurched, angry and wounded. I heard the insurer's worst nightmare form in real time. The humans moved. No command barked orders. No protocol unfurled. They flowed toward the damage like blood to a cut. Someone killed the lights because shadows showed heat better. Someone else rerouted power through a system no longer listed on schematics. Jalen crawled into the manifold with a patch kit that had been modified so often it no longer resembled its original design. The auditors tried to intervene, citing liability. Their words were lost in the roar. I watched one of them attempt to predict outcomes and simply stop, overwhelmed by branches that kept changing. The future refused to settle. Jalen reached the fracture and braced himself against the hull. The patch wouldn't hold. Everyone knew it. He knew it. He held it anyway, muscles screaming, suit alarms ignored. Others reinforced around him, bodies and tools forming a temporary structure that no material science would approve. The ship shuddered, then steadied, confused by the refusal to fail. Minutes stretched into something elastic. The fracture slowed, then stopped, as if embarrassed. Cooling systems caught up. Plasma bled away. The fire went out, sulking. When it was done, the crew drifted back, scorched and smiling. Someone finally turned the lights back on. The auditors stared at the patch, at Jalen floating free, shaking out his hands. Their instruments insisted the repair should not exist. Yet there it was, warm and real. Casualty report, 0. Damage assessment, extensive but survivable. Probability analysis, unavailable. One auditor excused themselves and vanished mid-sentence. Another sat down hard, veil flickering between realities. The third looked at me and asked, voice very small, how often this happened. Often enough, I said. They left without finishing their audit. An hour later, the updated notice arrived. Not just a refusal now, but a warning circulated across underwriting networks. Ships employing human maintenance crews exhibit emergent risk behavior. Loss modeling invalid. Exposure unacceptable at any price. We forwarded the notice to the cooperative. Laughter followed. Someone added it to the wall, next to older refusals, older warnings, older fears. The ship hummed, pleased with itself. As we resumed course, I watched the auditor's shuttle flee, engines burning too hard. They would report what they had seen in careful language, stripped of wonder. It wouldn't matter. The numbers would still be wrong. Ahead of us, space waited, full of failures eager to become disasters. We would meet them uninsured, undocumented, and alive. And somewhere an insurance algorithm would twitch, trying to understand why ships with humans aboard kept coming back when they were never supposed to at all. The refusal spread faster than we did. Ports stopped answering. Brokers smiled too tightly and slid contracts back across tables untouched. Even captains who trusted us began to hesitate when the premiums tripled, then vanished altogether. We became a statistical contagion, something to be quarantined. The irony was sharp enough to taste. The safer ships were with us aboard, the less anyone wanted to take responsibility for them.
We took work anyway.
We always did. Independent haulers, fringe surveyors, vessels already written off by polite society. They came to us with scorched decks and trembling cores, whispering like criminals. We fixed them, patched them, argued with their machines until they agreed to keep breathing. Payment was fuel, food, favors, sometimes nothing at all. Survival currency. On Capri Station, an insurer-sponsored inspector tried to bar us from docking. His drones formed a neat, threatening halo. Our pilot cut engines anyway. The station's gravity caught us and pulled. The drones recalculated too late. One clipped a pylon and shattered. We drifted in on inertia and stubbornness, hull scarred, engine silent. The inspector fined us. The station master waved us through. He'd lost 3 ships that quarter. All insured. None returned. That was when the rumors started changing tone. Not warnings anymore, but questions. Stories of human crews walking away from catastrophes that should have been final. Of ships held together by improvisation and profanity. Of maintenance logs that read like personal diaries, full of arguments, apologies, and promises made to meddle. We were hired by a consortium transport carrying a diplomatic archive older than most stars in the region. Their insurers insisted on remote oversight. Every action we took was monitored, flagged, scored. The ship's drive began to desync halfway through transit, harmonics sliding toward a fatal resonance. The oversight AI recommended shutdown. We didn't have time.
We sang to the drive.
Not literally, though Jalen hummed out of tune. We adjusted rhythms, altered maintenance cycles by instinct, tapped housings until the vibrations lined up again. The AI screamed about unauthorized deviations. The drive stabilized, humming back, chastened. When we arrived, intact and early, the consortium paid us double and quietly asked if we were available long-term. Their insurers withdrew the policy the same day. Pressure followed us, like a wake. Insurance firms shared data, building blacklists. Ports demanded waivers absolving them of everything, including reality. Some governments talked about regulation. Others talked about banning us outright, citing economic destabilization. If risk could not be priced, what did that mean for systems built on prediction? Then came the loss that wasn't ours. A luxury liner, fully insured, crewed by certified technicians and watched by 3 separate actuarial AIs, suffered a cascade failure in open space. The response was textbook. Every protocol followed. Every safeguard engaged. The ship died anyway, quietly, perfectly, according to plan. No survivors. We were nearby. Too far to help, close enough to hear the final telemetry echo across the void. The silence afterward felt accusing. The insurers held a summit. We weren't invited. Our names came up anyway. Someone asked, off record, whether a human crew would have made a difference. The models said no. The models always said no. Work dried up for a while after that.
Fear does that.
Then slowly, the calls returned. Desperate ones. Unofficial ones. Ships slipping their registries, erasing affiliations, just to hire us without admitting it. We became ghosts in the manifests. I realized then what truly frightened them. Not the accidents we prevented, but the implication we carried. That the universe was not fully knowable. That some problems could be solved only by presence, by stubborn attention, by people willing to put their bodies where predictions failed. Insurance is faith quantified. We broke that faith every time we survived. And as long as we did, the refusal would harden. Not because we were dangerous, but because we proved that certainty was the real liability. Somewhere in those sealed boardrooms, I imagined a quiet calculation beginning, not of premiums, but of alternatives, contingencies, exceptions. they would deny it publicly. Privately, they would start asking how long refusal could hold and what would happen when it finally failed under pressure alone. They didn't fail all at once. Insurance never does. It erodes, quietly, through clauses and exclusions, through footnotes that swallow entire hulls. By the time anyone admitted something was wrong, the system had already begun to eat itself. We felt it first in the margins. Claims delayed for months, then denied for reasons that read like philosophy instead of policy. Unquantifiable intervention. Causality deviation. One firm coined a term that stuck: human-induced variance. HIV, they joked internally, before realizing no one was laughing. A factor that could not be isolated, modeled, or priced. A contaminant in the math. Ships with human crews stopped being covered entirely. Not higher premiums, none. Absolute refusal. Even mixed crews were flagged. A single human engineer aboard could void an entire interstellar policy. Captains were forced to choose between us and solvency. Some chose the paper. Some chose us and ran dark. That was when the accidents began to cluster. Not on our ships. On the others. Systems failed in ways the models insisted were impossible. Redundancies collapsed in perfect sequence. Automated repairs fought each other to a standstill. The reports grew thick with phrases like unexpected interaction and emergent fault behavior. The more advanced the ship, the worse it fared. Intelligence layered atop intelligence until no one, not even the machines, understood the whole. We were pulled into one disaster unofficially. A mining vessel, uninsured and already declared lost, drifting on emergency power. The distress call wasn't public. It came through an old channel, routed 3 times, stripped of identifiers. We answered anyway. Inside, the ship was a mess of elegant systems locked in silent disagreement. Nothing was broken enough to trigger overrides. Everything was wrong enough to kill them eventually. The crew sat in the dark, waiting for the logic to finish its argument. We tore out interfaces, bypassed safeties, argued loudly with the ship like it was a stubborn animal. We left fingerprints on everything. Sweat, blood, grease. When the core finally stabilized, it wasn't because the equations resolved. It was because we forced a decision. They limped home alive. The insurers called it anecdotal noise. Then the data piled up. Survival rates diverged. Loss curves bent. Human-crewed ships didn't just survive more often, they survived stranger things. Events outside prior probability envelopes. Situations that should not have had outcomes at all. One firm tried a pilot program. Quiet. Limited. Human maintenance crews embedded. Policies rewritten to exclude method-based liability. They ensured outcomes only. If the ship arrived, they paid nothing. If it didn't, they paid everything. The actuaries protested. The board approved it anyway. The ships in that program stopped dying. Not dramatically. Mundanely. Failures still happened, but they resolved. Fires burned and were put out. Cascades halted halfway. The universe seemed, statistically, less cruel around us. That was the breaking point. Other firms panicked. Stock prices wobbled. If human presence flattened risk curves, then decades of premium structures were wrong. Worse, unnecessary. You couldn't charge for catastrophe if catastrophe no longer obeyed the math. Lobbyists went to work. They reframed us as a hazard again, this time cultural instead of mechanical. Unregulated improvisation. Hero bias. Systemic dependency on non-reproducible labor. They warned that relying on humans would weaken galactic infrastructure, make it fragile to human absence. Privately, they asked for our manuals. We didn't have any to give. Governments stepped in, sensing blood and leverage. Proposals circulated to license human crews, to standardize us, to turn instinct into checklist. We laughed when we saw the drafts. Then we stopped laughing when we realized they were serious. A standardized human is no longer a human, just another component. The first riot happened on an orbital hub when Port Authority tried to expel all human crews to comply with insurer mandates. The station lost power 6 hours later due to a minor, unrelated systems fault. We helped restore it from the outside, unpaid, unrecorded. The authority reversed the order the next day. I started to understand the shape of what was coming. Insurance had always been a promise against the unknown. Humans were becoming a way to erase the unknown instead. Not perfectly, not safely, but enough to terrify anyone whose business depended on fear being predictable. They would not refuse forever. They couldn't. The pressure was too great, the evidence too loud. When the refusal finally cracked, it wouldn't be a policy update. It would be a reckoning. The reckoning arrived without announcement, the way all real failures do. Not as a press release or a market crash, but as silence, an absence of numbers where numbers were supposed to be. 3 major insurance cores went dark within the same hour. No explosion. No sabotage trace. Their predictive engines simply stopped returning answers. Inputs went in. Outputs never came back. Entire constellations of dependent systems froze, waiting for permission that would not arrive. At first, they called it a glitch, then a cyber attack, then, quietly, something worse, model exhaustion. The simulations had eaten all available futures and found none they could stand behind. Every branch led to unacceptable uncertainty. The machines did the only logical thing left. They refused. Trade stalled. Ships held position at jump limits, afraid to move uninsured. Ports backed up for light years. A civilization built on hedged risk discovered what happens when risk stops agreeing to be priced. We were summoned at last. Not as contractors. As witnesses. A closed chamber, deep and shielded, filled with beings who had never expected to need us. Actuaries. Executives. The architects of certainty. Their faces, organic, synthetic, luminous, were all doing the same thing. Watching us, as if we were a weather front rolling in. They asked questions badly, out of order. How did we decide what to fix first? Why did we ignore certain alarms? How did we know when to break protocol? We told them the truth. We didn't know. We paid attention. We listened. We stayed with the problem until it stopped being abstract and started being personal. We accepted responsibility before outcomes were guaranteed. That answer frightened them more than anything else. One of their machines was brought online during the session, a stripped-down predictive core designed to evaluate us in real time. It ran scenarios as we spoke, trying to bound us, define us, turn us into variables. Its confidence interval widened instead. The core flagged a system-wide anomaly. Wherever human crews were present, future state resolution degraded. Not into chaos, but into openness. Too many viable paths. Too much adaptability. The future refused to collapse into a single, billable outcome. From an insurance perspective, one executive said slowly, "You are uninsurable." We nodded. We had known that for a long time. "What happens," another asked, "if we stop trying to insure you?" That was the wrong question. Before we could answer, alarms rippled through the chamber. Not loud, subdued. The kind reserved for things no one wanted to name yet. A cascade of alerts from outside monitored space. Deep routes. Old lanes no one used anymore, because the probabilities were ugly. Something was moving through them. Not a ship. Not a fleet. A pattern of failures, synchronized across systems that had never shared data. Drives misaligning. Safeties hesitating. Automated repairs waiting for authorization that never came. The same signature everywhere. Model stalling. Futures diverging. Certainty evaporating. An executive whispered what the machines would not. This shouldn't be possible. I felt the old, familiar tightening in my chest. The moment before action, when theory falls away. They've built everything to run without people, I said. Optimized it. Abstracted it. Removed judgment because judgment was messy. And someone asked. And now the universe is asking a question their systems can't answer. The room filled with overlapping projections. Loss estimates climbing without limit. Entire regions blinking from insurable to undefined. The insurance cores tried to reboot. Failed again. Finally, they looked at us not as anomalies, not as hazards, but as the only remaining option no model could preemptively reject. What would it take? The first executive asked, voice tight, for you to help. I thought of all the waivers, the refusals, the blacklists, the years of being treated like a rounding error that wouldn't behave. It would take trust, I said, and acceptance that you won't know the outcome in advance. Silence answered me, the hardest thing to insure against. Outside, across the dark routes of space, the first confirmed total loss signal bloomed and vanished. Then another. And another, closer this time. We stood there, human and unquantified, while an entire industry realized too late that the future had stopped asking for permission and was about to find out who was willing to meet it without guarantees.